I'm just sitting in the car, just about to go into the playing venue. I'm feeling relatively confident. I think that my opponent is supposed to be like, I don't know, 2 to 250 points below me, which is great, but it hasn't stopped me from losing a game like that before. So I think I've got to make sure that I'm not overconfident, but I think I feel relatively good. I feel tired, but I had a good dinner, so I think that should help. I had some steak, had a relaxing evening before driving down. Hour's drive though isn't amazing, and it wasn't the best drive, but I don't know. I think you can probably hear in my voice that I'm ready. I'm ready, I think. Let's see how we do. Okay, so those were my pre-game thoughts, and at the end of the video will also be my post-game thoughts immediately afterwards before I checked everything with the engine. But let's jump into it. This is a really interesting game. So it starts off with pawn e4, of course. My opponent goes for the French. And I've recently been playing the Monte Carlo system. So that is the exchange French, which is normally quite a boring opening, and then c4. So this is effectively like playing a Caro-Kann Panov attack, but against the French. So the Panov would be against the Caro, c6, d4, d5, take, take, and c4, right? This is the Panov. Compare this position to this position, and you'll notice the only difference is whether this pawn is on e7 or on c7, right? And I love the Panov. I think that it takes a lot of Caro players out of their comfort zone, and that's the same reason that I play the Monte Carlo against the French. So my opponent goes knight to f6. We go knight to c3. And one of the main ideas in this opening is that, yes, we're offering up the c4 pawn to be captured, giving ourselves an isolated queen's pawn. And typically that should be a bit of a downside for us. I mean, black will play for c6 and getting a knight into the d5 square to blockade the d4 pawn typically. But we can have very nice play, particularly with our bishops, our knight coming into e5 in a lot of cases, and maybe pushing d5 if the opportunity arises. So my opponent goes bishop to b4, which is the main move. I go bishop to d3. During the game, I was slightly concerned about knight to e4 for some reason. I was trying to figure out the best move, and then I realized it was just knight to e2 defending, and I'm absolutely fine. If knight takes, I was going to play pawn takes, and then the bishop gets kicked away, and then I can... Okay, well, there I can win a pawn, but let's say the bishop goes back to e7. I can take, I can castle. I was quite happy. So my opponent goes bishop to g4, and this was the first moment where I didn't really know what I was doing. So I was thinking, okay, can I make queen b3 work? This is what I was trying to figure out, and I came to the conclusion of no. Reason being is because my d4 pawn is a big problem now. And yes, I'm attacking the bishop, and if black takes, then brilliant. B takes, if takes, I can take, and we have a fantastic position. But black is not obliged to take. I was concerned about knight c6, but also dc4, because I figured that if I take here with the bishop, black can probably get away with queen here or queen e7, defending the bishop and defending f7. The engine likes knight to c6, but I saw queen e7 and I thought, okay, I'm not better here. So I'd have to take with the queen, but I don't really want my queen on the c4 square, just knight c6. This pawn is a problem. So I was trying to decide between knight to e2, which I thought was interesting, but I couldn't figure out why I was allowing this, or pawn f3, which is the move that I went for. Now, of course, Grandmaster Ben Feingold says never play pawn to f3, but here I thought I had a good reason to do so, because it stops this knight ever coming into g4 or e4, and we'll see later in the game that this f3 move kind of wins me the game, to be fair. You'll find out why later, of course. And, okay, it stops my knight coming to f3, and often, like I said, the knight comes to f3 and then into e5. But I figured, okay, this bishop has to retreat, and it doesn't have any good squares. It can't go to f5. If it comes to h5, I thought it's just useless. I bring a knight into e2, into f4 at some point. I'll castle. I could even rotate via g3 into f5, and I should be very happy here. The engine, after pawn to f3, wants black to play d takes c4. And after bishop takes c4, bishop to e6, bishop e6, f e6, this looks pretty horrific. And I did see this kind of idea, and I just thought, no, there's no way that's good enough. Engine thinks that black is okay, but realistically, this pawn is incredibly weak, in my opinion. And with a queen potentially coming to b3 with targets on b7, e6, the bishop on b4, I thought only we can be better. Although maybe just queen d5. So my opponent plays the more natural bishop back to e6. And here there is one move to hold the advantage for white. Pause the video, try and find it. This is just a nice positional move. Black is, of course, threatening to take on c4, but typically we don't really want to be taking here, because after knight takes, there's pressure on our knight. We're going to be forced to go knight to e2 to defend, and after something like knight c6, we can try to castle, but, like, engine here likes take, okay, and then bishop takes, and if knight takes, queen takes, exploiting our move f3. But regardless of any tactics, this is just a great setup for black. So c5 is the idea. And basically, if black doesn't do anything, we have a really nice clamp on the black position. Our pawns are controlling some really useful squares. And I figured, okay, I can just play something like knight to e2, knight to f4, queen to c2. Of course, I'll castle as well. And as long as b6 doesn't work to try to break my pawn structure, I should be good. But I was like, okay, well, of course, b6 can't be played because of the move queen to a4. Then knight c6 can't be played to defend the bishop because the knight is undefended, right? So that would be brilliant. I thought that black could try, after c5, taking on c3, and after bc3, go b6. I was moderately concerned about this, I suppose. But I thought here I had bishop to a3. And I thought this was quite nice. So if this is taken, I can take with the bishop, and now black can't castle the king. I have the bishop pair, and it is a very, very nice bishop pair. So I wasn't too concerned about the immediate bishop c3, right? So b6 can't be played, and bishop takes, pawn takes b6. I meet with bishop to a3. So my pawn is absolutely fine. What I don't want to do is take on b6. So let's say take and b6. I don't want to take this. After a takes, the rook is very nice. c5 is on the way. Not a massive fan. So here my opponent very quickly played the move c6, which I thought was a bit strange. I thought he should just get castled because his king was a problem in the center of the board. But he went c6, and I was like, ooh, okay. I need to get rid of this bishop, because if I'm lazy with a move like knight to e2, which the engine thinks is the best move, I was slightly concerned about b6, because I was like, okay, if I go a3, and bishop takes c3, knight takes c3, b takes c5, and d takes c5, the engine here likes this, but I thought that this was a very, very strong pawn on e5. Now, when I see this position, the engine does like knight bd7, bishop e3, and bringing the bishop over to d4, I assume, at some point. And that does make a lot of sense in retrospect. But just looking at this pawn structure, I didn't really like it. I didn't want to give up control of the e5 square. So I played the move queen to b3, which I thought was a really nice idea. Of course, I'm attacking the bishop, and I'm putting pressure on b7. If queen to a5 is played, trying to defend the bishop, I can just go pawn to a3, which would force bishop takes c3. And after b takes c3, I have pressure on the b7 pawn. And I'm also maybe threatening ideas of bishop d2, pawn c4 with discoveries. But because I have so much pressure on the b file, I was very happy. So I was thinking, okay, how does black defend this? If he goes pawn to b6, here the engine suggests queen to b4. I can't say that I saw that move exactly. I just thought that we have a lot of pressure down the b file, so taking would be very difficult for black to actually execute. Let's say knight to e2. If this is taken, then queen b7, and I figured I should be winning, which is true. The rook is just trapped. So on queen b3, the best move here is a5, which, I mean, after a3, the engine wants bishop takes c5, d takes c5, and pawn d4. And I did see this idea with discoveries on my queen. I had seen that as a possibility. I thought in this position it was fine, because if bishop takes c5, I don't have to take back. I can just take on b7, hitting the rook, and I thought this should be very nice. The engine suggests bishop back to d6, queen a8, queen b6. and things are very strange here. My queen is trapped, but I'm not losing her just yet. Worst case, I can trade her off for the rook on f8 once black castles. But my opponent takes on c3. And here I was very happy. I took back with the queen, because if pawn to b6 going after my c5 pawn, I just go pawn b4. And I had this really nice idea of after pawn to a5, the engine suggests taking on b6, which maybe I find during the game, but I thought b5 was quite nice. I thought this was quite nice. Trying to blow open the queen side. And if something like bc5, queen c5, I was like, well, black can't castle. Here after knight d7, I'm winning after queen c6. So you'd have to go knight fd7. And I had calculated this. And here I wanted queen d6. And apparently the only move here is queen h4 check, going after the pawn on d4, which is a very bold thing, because I'm about to take on c6. I thought after something like queen e7, I can probably trade queens, go like bishop to a3, something like this. And I thought this has to be better for us with the bishop pair. So my opponent goes knight bd7, which is a move I was very happy to see, because I went bishop to f4. Now in this position, I thought that black has to castle. Because if he doesn't castle, I'm going to go bishop. So let's say black plays something like b6, which looks natural, going after my pawn. Here I was going to go bishop to d6. And tell me how black castles. The engine suggests knight g8, which I assume is to try to play knight e7. So let's say we develop to go knight e7, blocking the bishop from f8, and after castles, black can castle, and the game goes on, and I'm just better with my bishop pair. And a very nice structure over here. I can go b4 whenever I want. Although if this is ever taken, I assume I just take back, and my bishop is still glorious. So on bishop f4, I had to calculate a certain move, because this pawn f3 move, right, it does come with consequences, and the consequence is that this diagonal could be a problem. And so I told my opponent after the game, actually, because we were discussing the game in general. And by the way, he said he'd never seen the Monte Carlo before, which is one of the reasons I love to play it, because people aren't familiar with it. I told him that I was trying to bait him into this move, knight to h5, which is the move that he went for. And I was really happy to see that. Now, what's the point of knight h5? Well, of course, black is attacking the bishop, right? If I drop the bishop back, then queen h4, and I can't play pawn g3 because of the classic tactic of knight g3, hg3, and queen takes h1. So on queen h4, I would have to go king f1, and, you know, maybe there's knight check. Speculative, but maybe this can be played. So it's kind of scary, right? So I was thinking, okay, I could go bishop e3, and if queen to h4 check, I have bishop back to f2, and I was like, okay, that should be fine. But I also thought, well, and this was the reason I was baiting the move knight to h5, so I was thinking this in this position before I went bishop f4. I was thinking if bishop f4, knight h5, bishop d6, that's the move I want to play, and that's what I did play. I thought, if queen to h4 check, I simply have g3. You can't take because my bishop defends, right? So there's no h takes and queen takes h1. So I thought, okay, after something like queen to g5, I should be fine. I mean, as long as the queen infiltrating e3 isn't a big issue, this is fine. King f2 is the best move in this position, which I did also consider. Now, queen h4 check isn't really the problem, though. The problem is queen to g5, which is what my opponent played. Why is this a problem? Well, the queen on g5 is attacking g2 and threatening an infiltration on e3. We also have to watch, because the move queen to h4 check could also come with a fork on the queen and the d4 pawn. Now, the thing is, in this position, if black plays anything else, let's say g6, right? Then I'm just clearly better. I was going to go knight to e2, and if now queen g5 is attempted, I simply castle. And if bishop to h3, I just have rook f2. So black has to act immediately. So he goes queen to g5, which makes sense, right? Going after g2 and going after the e3 square. And here I have three options. And I'd already decided what I wanted to do back in this position, right? So I'd calculated
bishop f4, knight h5, bishop d6, queen g5, and I was like, okay, I either go g3 and allow queen e3, which I didn't really like, king f2, defending g2 and e3, which was interesting, or queen d2, defending g2, defending e3, and offering a queen trade. So when my opponent did go queen g5, right, this is easier to visualize now, but you have to calculate this from a while away to commit to the maneuver, because of course the black king can't castle kingside anymore. I thought, okay, king f2 is interesting, and I was going to play this, because, okay, I stop this, and I stop this, and there's no dark squared bishop for black, so I should be pretty safe. The reason I rejected this move was because of knight to f4. And I was like, my bishop's under attack, g2's under attack, I'm going to have to go bishop f1. And I saw this, again, before I played bishop f4. And the engine actually thinks it's the best idea. But practically speaking, why am I undeveloping my bishop? And why am I allowing this knight to be on the f4 square? To me, that made no sense. So, after queen g5, I went, okay, queen d2, that's going to be my move. Because I defend e3, I defend g2, and I effectively force black into a queen trade. If black tries queen h4 check, forking my king and my undefended d4 pawn, here, apparently the best idea is g3, giving up the d4 pawn and going knight to e2. I was not going to do that. I was planning on playing queen to f2. Here the engine suggests knight to f4, because if takes, then here, here, and here, black wins a pawn. But I was thinking just takes, and this looks fine to me. This looks brilliant. My bishop is amazing, and it can't be removed. Because if b6, I just go for a move like b4, and this is very easy. Even if the b file opens up, the black rook can't use b8 anyway. The black king is completely stranded. I have a monopoly over the open file, right? So, my opponent went for the queen trade on d2. So, takes and takes. And here, what does black play? What does black play? I mean, if I just check my score sheet quickly, this is my score sheet. Where was it? After king takes d2, I put a little plus next to the move because I wanted to remind myself that in this position, I thought I was much better. I thought I was much better during the game. I was very confident because I have the bishop pair. How do you contest these bishops? There's no way. The bishop can't come to f5. The knight can't come to f4. I control that square. And I mean, what does black play? I thought castle queenside maybe for black. I can go g4, kicking the knight away. Here the engine likes h4, but I thought, I don't know, like b4, b5. Like, how is black stopping me? He can't do anything. The engine suggests knight b6. If I take this, then rook d6, ba7, black has a bit of play. But I don't have to take the knight. I can just do anything else. Engine likes bishop to e7, knight c4. Okay, well, the engine just wants to give up an exchange, which, like, to me is effectively just resignation. So my opponent went f5, and I thought, okay, that's an interesting move. But what does it do? And I was trying to think, what is he trying to do? And I thought he was trying to go for some kingside expansion with like g5 and that kind of thing. And after my next move, knight to h3, which is the best move, I put on my score sheet a hashtag to basically represent I thought it was game over. I thought this was game over. Why is this such a big deal? Well, the problem is this bishop. The move f5 leaves this bishop undefended, right? And rook e1 and knight h3 are interchangeable. They're both coming no matter what, basically. And g4 was an idea I really wanted to play. The reason I didn't go g4 in this position, right? Point being, if fg4, rook e1, king f7, and fg4, if this is taken, I have rook e7 forking. And this is defended for now, but I'm going to go h3 to kick the bishop away. So let's say king back to g8, h3. The bishop is lost. Simply lost. There's no moves for the bishop. Um, sorry, what was I saying? Yes. So what I wanted to do, though, is go knight to h3 first. Knight h3 has a very simple threat of rook e1. So let's say black plays b6. Rook e1, pinning the bishop to the king. The king has to come to f7, and then knight g5 check wins the bishop, right? Pretty simple. So why did I go knight to h3? Well, I wanted my opponent to play h6. I wanted to bait him into the move h6 because it weakens the g6 square. If we can get rid of this pawn somehow, there could be tactics on g6, right? So I go rook a to e1, forcing the move king to f7, which my opponent plays to defend the bishop and unpin the bishop. And here f3 comes to fruition because I go pawn to g4. Now, I was trying to calculate rook e6. I was trying to calculate this, and this is a winning move. g4 is actually better, and I did go for g4, but rook e6 is still winning. Why? So I had calculated rook e6, king e6, rook e1. Simple, right? If the king goes to f7, rook e7, I pick the knight up, I have two bishops for a rook, and that's obviously completely winning, particularly with how good those bishops are, and the fact this rook is stuck in the corner. So, okay, yeah, that's fine. What I couldn't figure out, though, was after rook e1 check, what do I do after king to f6? What do I do? And I couldn't figure this out, because I thought, okay, rook e7, sure, that's great, but rook d8, defending the knight. And then what? Then what? The engine actually suggests b4, and after rook h2, e8, rook e8, rook e8, I'm still winning. But the whole reason I'm winning is because of this move g4. And the king is taking up the knight's retreat square, and the knight is trapped. I didn't see this. I didn't see that idea. So after king f6, I can just go g4 immediately, right? I didn't see this concept of the knight being trapped. I was trying to hunt down the black king. So I was thinking like, oh, bishop e7, but then king f7, and I can't bring my rook here. So I was like, well, that doesn't work, does it? Because I retreat my rook, my opponent challenges me on the e-file, and why am I down in exchange? So I couldn't calculate the fact the knight was trapped. So I went g4 immediately, which is the best move. Why is g4 so powerful? Well, if the knight moves, then gf5 and the bishop's trapped. The bishop is cut off on all sides, right? So, okay, the knight also has no moves other than an f6, but then I win the bishop. So you have to take on g4. And I thought I was completely winning. And I thought, okay, worst case scenario, this was my worst case scenario, is after bishop g4, well, take bishop g4, which my opponent didn't play. He retreated the knight back to f6. If bishop g4, I get access to e7, right? Okay, if king f8, I obviously have discovered checks. That's completely winning. I mean, this isn't even the best move, but it is completely winning. So, okay, the king has to go to g8. And I was like, okay, there must be some way to win this position. I can't see it, but I'm down a pawn. This rook is stuck in the corner. I've got a rook on e7. There has to be some way to win this. That's what I was thinking, right? So my opponent didn't go for it. He brought the knight back to f6 because allowing rook e7, I just thought, even if I'm down a pawn, his rook on h8 is stuck forever. I mean, there's no way he can come back from that. There's absolutely no way. There's going to be so many checkmating ideas. So, because my bishop covers important squares as well. So he brought his knight back to f6. And here, there is a crucial move. Try and find it. Pause the video, try and find it if you want. But the move is knight to f4. Knight to f4 is important because we attack the bishop, but also gain control of g6 a second time. Again, this is why I induced the move h6 earlier on, because I want control of g6 with the bishop and now the knight. The bishop's under attack, right? If you go knight to f8 to defend it, I simply take the knight and then I take the bishop. Easy. So if rook e8, then bishop g6, I skewer the king and the rook, king g8, bishop e8, or knight e6. I mean, there's so many ways to win, right? So if this happens, bishop g4, rook e7, king g8, I calculated h3, The bishop is basically out of squares. Basically out of squares. If the bishop goes to h5, then take, and take. The knight on f6 is overloaded. So the bishop would be forced to the f3 square. And after rook to g1, I thought, okay, I'm literally attacking with every single piece. The black rooks are not in the game. He has so many targets. The bishop's stranded. The bishop can try to come to e4, but then I will just mate you, right? In very nice fashion. So basically, I thought, okay, black can't play that. He cannot take on g4. The only move is the move my opponent played, knight e4. The only option. And I'd calculated this. So I thought, okay, bishop e4, d-e4, knight e6, king e6, rook e4. So we get to this position, and I'm like, okay, I'm up a pawn. But that's not the full story. Because if the black king moves, I mean, I didn't calculate this, to be honest. I thought there's no need. Rook e7 is on the way. Rook f1 is a move. h4 is a move. Trying to trap the black king. If I play a move like rook h to e1, the black rook cannot contest me on the e file. Cannot use the f file because of my bishop. The d file is shut. The c file is shut. The b file can't be used because of my bishop. Even if b6 is played trying to break out, you can't use it. So I thought, okay, I'm up a pawn, but that's not really the big picture. The big picture is that the black pieces simply can't move, right? So my opponent played the best move. He told me after the game that basically he thought if he retreats the king to f7 or f6, then he loses because I'm up a pawn and he has no play. Or he plays a risky move and potentially gets checkmated, but he's going to lose anyway. And I agree. He played king d5, which I think is the best move from a practical perspective. Obviously, you can see it's +5, right? But it's not simple. And I think that this is the best way for black to go about it. So why is king d5 so risky? Because if I get 2 moves in a row, the game ends. Rook h e1, and what's my threat? Here. Knight takes, rook takes, and the king is checkmated. So the only way to survive would be to sacrifice a rook on e8. The take, and obviously I'm up an entire rook. So this is incredibly risky to play the move king d5. So here, I had 3 moves that I was considering, and I actually mentioned this in my post-game thoughts, which will be at the very end of the video. And I was thinking, okay, I either go king d3, rook e7, or rook h2 e1. And those are the 3 best moves. Think about which one you might choose. Now, they're all completely winning. The best move is king d3. And this seems very natural. Defending d4, defending c4, defending the rook. My king can't be attacked. The knight can't give a check or anything, right? And again, if black plays a nothing move, I double up and I deliver checkmate. So let's say here, 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 and here. This is checkmate, right? So, okay, yeah, sure, that makes sense. The reason I didn't like the move king to d3 is because I thought that after rook to e8, rook e1, takes, I think I was slightly concerned about something like b6. And I was like, okay, well, I'm never delivering checkmate now because I've only got 1 rook. Sorry, I don't have that. I can just go for a move like rook e7. I mean, this is absolutely fine. I think I was slightly concerned about takes, knight takes. I think this is what concerned me. I am still winning here, but there is more chess to be played. I'm up a pawn in a rook endgame. The problem for black is my king is very good, and these 2 pawns are very good. His pawns are completely split, so after something like pawn a5, king e4, I should be able to convert my 2 versus 1. But it was more complicated. Now, the way that I have to play is not taking back on c5, but actually just moving the bishop, attacking the knight, and if the knight moves, then rook e5 is mate. I didn't calculate all of this. I couldn't see all of this. So, okay, I rejected king d3. I also thought, okay, what about rook to e7? This can't be taken because the knight hangs, right? So the only move would be knight to f6 to counterattack. And I was thinking, okay, if rook g7, there's knight to e4. That's actually quite annoying. And I don't know, something like king up. Oh, there's checks here. If I bring the king here, maybe something like knight d6 could be concerning. And it's just, it's complicated, right? And the reason is because this isn't the best move. The best move is king d3. And after knight takes g4, rook h2 e1, I'm again threatening checkmate, so black would have to sacrifice a rook on e8. I didn't calculate that far. So I chose the worst out of the three moves, rook h2 e1. Now, you will hear my thoughts about that just after the game, before I checked with the engine in the post-game analysis, which will be at the very end. So, okay, rook h2 e1. Black has to be incredibly careful. If he plays something like rook c8, then king d3, and he's going to get checkmated unless he sacrifices a rook, right? So he is forced to play knight to f6, attacking my rook. Now if I give this check, after king takes d4, I couldn't quite figure out a way to convert this. I mean, the knight can never take, because I just fork, right? The engine likes pawn b3, taking away the c4 square. But I was like, there's not really a good way to win this. I mean, my opponent can even go rook h2 e8, because the knight is helping out. And if I'm lazy, and I don't find bishop e7 or g5, the game is actually a draw. This king is actually really good. So I played rook f4, which I thought was quite nice. Okay, I defend g4, I defend d4, and again, if black isn't careful, I'm going to checkmate him after something like king d3 and rook to e5. My opponent goes rook e8, which I expected him to play, which is an inaccuracy, believe it or not. Now, I was initially planning on playing bishop e5. I don't want to take this. Because after rook e8, black actually has decent play, and I have to watch for knight to e4 check. Here, after king to d3, I'm still better, but it's not clear. So here there is a killer move. White has a killer move. Can you find it? Pause the video. The move is bishop e7. Why is bishop e7 such a strong move? It forces black's hand. It stops knight e4, because now you don't have enough control over the e4 square. I'm also potentially threatening to take the knight and win a second pawn. Remember, I'm still up a pawn. If black plays nothing, let's say b6, king d3, and I'm going to mate black. If takes, I have mate here, or I have mate here, because I cut off the e-file. So, this is pretty dire after bishop e7, and my opponent plays the only move, king c4. You cannot allow king d3. In this endgame in general, if I get two moves in a row, I just checkmate black. So my opponent plays risky by bringing the king forwards, but it is the best option. And but bishop e7 is just such a killer move. So in this position, the engine likes to move pawn d5 check with discovered check, right? I did see this as a possibility. If the king moves, I thought d6 was interesting. The engine isn't a fan of it, though. It's a bit complicated with my pawns being kind of weak. If king takes d5, the engine thinks that after king d3, I'm checkmating black, unless he sacrifices a knight on e4. I didn't see that as a possibility, I'm not going to lie. I instead played the second best move, pawn b3 check. And my thought process was, okay, if king to b4, now I'll go d5, because the king can't take. Which, from a human perspective, is logical, but it's a bit unnecessary. And this would force the king back to like b5. And then I thought that d6 was interesting. Also, a4 is interesting, kicking the king further away. I can also cash out for an extra pawn whenever I want. Realistically, though, I wanted to play pawn to d6, something like knight d7. And I thought I should be able to win this position after something like b4, b6. Here, b5 is a strong move if takes c6, and I'm just crashing through. But my opponent goes king b5, which I was expecting, so that this doesn't come with discovered check. And here I thought, okay, I have a few moves. I could go pawn a4. I could. But I thought after king to a5 in the endgames, why am I giving b3 as a target? That makes no sense. So I thought, okay, let's cash out. Let's cash out. By playing b3, I kick the king further out of the action. I don't have any major weaknesses. Let's just trade everything. I'm up 2 pawns. But I thought this was completely winning because I'm going to win this pawn. And if black plays rook h8 defending the pawn, this is far too passive. You cannot play like this. I can try and go after these pawns, but realistically, I just bring the king to the game. If black tries to bring the king, again, rook f7 is strong, but even just king d3, sacrificing this pawn, I thought was absolutely fine. I can go rook to f2, but even like king c3, if this is taken, rook to f2 check, if the king goes to a3, I mean, engine here likes rook f1, king a2 escaping checkmate, and then, I don't know, rook f7. This rook is just completely out of the game. That was my thought process. My opponent tries to play actively, though, which is good. The engine here prefers rook to g8, going after this pawn. And I think here I was planning on playing rook to f4, just defending both of my pawns. And I thought I have no real targets other than a2. But if the king ever steps, I have d5 with discovered check. King takes, and I don't know, takes. I thought I should be winning because of my 2v1, but yeah, maybe it's difficult. My opponent plays very actively, though, with rook to e8 check. And when I saw this move, I actually panicked for a second because I thought, wait, am I just losing a pawn? Because after king f2, which is the best move, rook e4, I was like, ooh, wait a minute. Am I okay? Am I okay here? I'm losing these pawns. But then I was like, actually, no, I'm fine. King f3, and I'm fine. I sacrificed both of these pawns for the h-pawn, but it simply doesn't matter. It does not matter. I thought that after g5, my opponent could try giving me a check on d3, and he could try giving me a perpetual check, basically. So I was going to go king e4, rook to d4. I was going to go king to f5, rook d5. I was going to go king f6, rook d6. I was going to go king to e7, offering a rook trade, which of course black cannot accept. So after rook d5, attacking the pawn, g6, rook g5, king f6, attacking the rook, forcing the rook back, and g7, I figured this was completely winning. Which is why, after king c5, pawn g5, my opponent resigns. Why does he resign? He's only down a pawn. Yeah, it doesn't matter. This 3 versus 2 is not mobile. It's going to take forever to win my pawns. So let's say after g5, black goes rook d2. I keep pushing. If you take this, I keep pushing. And you have no way of stopping the pawn. You can't access the g2 square. So I'm going to promote, and there's nothing black can do about it. So again, after g5, black resigns, and you will hear my post-game thoughts now.
Well, I'm very happy with that game. I felt like I just had it in the bag the whole time. I really was scared about going for that g4 pawn push, but it felt like the right thing to do. I was talking with my opponent after the game, and yeah, I don't know. He said that he'd never really seen the Monte Carlo before with well, the opening that I played with pawn c4 in the exchange French, and yeah, I think that I definitely, in my opinion, went for the right thing with pawn to f3 against bishop g4. I wasn't sure what I was doing there because there was a few different options that I had and I didn't know that position. But I think that the middle game was good. The going for the queen trade, I think, was the correct decision, because if I don't go bishop d6 and I instead drop the bishop back after knight to h5, I mean, black castles, and I mean, I'm probably still slightly better, but there's a lot more chess to be played. Whereas going bishop d6, going for the queen trade, I mean, I can never lose that position. I'm still not sure about whether I should have played rook to e7 instead of rook h to e1. That I'm not sure about. During the game, I felt like I'd made the wrong decision. And then as it progressed, I felt like I actually made the right decision. I don't know whether rook e7 or rook h2e1 was better, but I felt like stopping rook e8 was imperative. Bishop e7, I'm very happy with. Bishop e7 I thought was an awesome move because it just gets me into a 2-pawn up rook endgame, which, because I can win the h-pawn and keep my h and g pawns, that's always winning. So I'm very, very happy with that game.